It is an unassuming morning in March 1968 along the Skull Valley in Utah. The area is used for grazing of livestock. As the sun rises and sunlight is cast across the ground, a horrific sight is revealed. Hundreds of bodies are strewn across the land. The worst nightmare of any farmer has happened. That is the mass loss of their animals. You see, the bodies are of sheep, hundreds, with many still in the process of dying. A local sheriff is called and attends the scene. He would say, "Sheep laying all over, all of them down, patches of white as far as you could see. The cause of what is unfolding is somewhat of a mystery. After all, the random mass dying of ruminants isn't a common occurrence. Was it food poisoning, disease, or maybe something else?" Well, our story today is mainly known as the Dugway Sheep Incident, and not so much the Skull Valley Sheep Kill Incident for a reason. That is because nearby there is a weapons testing facility called the Dugway Proving Ground. It is a chemical weapons facility, and it would seem a likely source of a mass mystery exploration of animals. My name is John, and welcome to Plainly Difficult. This video wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for my Patreon, YouTube and Ko-fi members. If you want early access to the channel's videos, as well as ad-free access to the videos, you can from £1 per month. And as always, the links will be in the pinned comment below. Dugway Proving Ground. Like many stories on this channel, our story begins with the little known multiple border dispute 70 to 80 million death inducing event called World War II. So after Pearl Harbor, the United States sought to ramp up its military capacity. It looked to expand across many different weapons platforms and disciplines, and one, at least for today's subject, was that of chemical and biological weapons. To look at such weapons, a proving ground was needed. Quickly, a site was selected and opened in Utah, some 85 miles southwest of Salt Lake City. The area was picked for its remoteness in comparison to the Army's site in Maryland. Work was quickly set about after opening as stated on the military1source.mil website. On February 12, 1942, Dugway Proving Ground was established and testing was underway by that summer. Initial testing work undertaken on site included incendiary bombs, flamethrowers, chemical weapons and modified chemical agents sprayed from aircraft. Mock towns were built for testing of incendiary bombing methodology. You see, testing is vital as it helps predict distribution of agents in both an attack and a defensive role, where protection of personnel is vitally important. After World War II, the site was slowly deactivated. However, only just a few years later, it would be reopened when the Korean War kicked off, sparking the site back into full-time operation. Post-war, the site would continue to run as a permanent installation and expand. In 1958, the US Army Chemical, Biological and Radiological Weapons School moved to Dugway. Various chemicals would be tested on the site, with hundreds of open-air releases and even nuclear fallout releases. But for today, we're only going to talk about one, and that is of VX. VX, short for the rather ominous name of Venomous Agent X, is a toxic synthetic chemical compound, a nerve agent. Nerve agents disrupt the ways nerves transfer messages to the organs within your body, and this is very scary stuff. Now, the beginnings of VX go back to the early 1950s with its discovery during pesticides research at Imperial Chemical Industries right here in the UK. This is how VX works when it's ingested into your body. So when you want to say get off the sofa, you need to move some muscles. This requires messages to be sent from your brain along your nervous system to your muscle cell. To transfer these messages from one neuron to another neuron, gland or muscle cell, chemicals called neurotransmitters are used to transfer messages over the gap between the cells at places called synaptic junctions. One such neurotransmitter is the organic compound acetylcholine. This is used in the autonomic nervous system responsible for, amongst other things, regulating heart rate and blood pressure. After fulfilling its function for transmitting the message at the synaptic junction, the acetylcholine must be cleared. This is done by enzymes which break it down within the synapse. The enzyme acetylcholinesterase is released and immediately breaks down the acetylcholine, which allows the muscle or organ to relax. This is how VX causes you damage. It inhibits the creation of the enzyme. You see, in you getting up from the sofa scenario, your muscles have contracted. If the acetylcholinesterase isn't released, your muscle will remain tense. But VX causes this across any part of the body that needs acetylcholinesterase, such as your breathing or heartbeat. VX can enter your body via inhalation, or personally, what I find more terrifying, absorption through your skin. It can be deployed in its oily-like substance form or as droplets when dispensed from a sprayer. Being one of the most deadly nerve agents, the US military wanted to learn about its effectiveness, and as such it tested VX in various settings and delivery methods. One such was via this thing, the TMU-28-B ARAM air spray tank. It was made of steel and would disseminate vaporized VX from the underside of a F4 Phantom. When over the target area, explosive charges are fired, and the chemical agent is sprayed out, covering everything below. However, after beginning disbursement, there was no way to stop it until the tanks were completely empty. Much like a fart in the wind, its dispersion is very much reliant on the weather, as it can blow your deadly nerve agent off target. Which leads us on to the event. I've never seen such a sight in my life. It is the morning of the 14th of March 1968, and farmers at the Hatch Ranch in Skull Valley have discovered some of their flock around White Rock on the eastern slope of the Cedar Mountains in various states of distress. They were confused, refusing to walk, having trouble breathing. Some were experiencing fits, and others had died. In other areas, sheep were showing the same strange behaviours. As the day wore on, as the snow blew in, more and more sheep were succumbing to this bizarre sickness. Some were seen to show symptoms after licking the snow or eating the frozen grass below. Vets were called in, and it was something that they hadn't seen in sheep before. Such was the concern that the University of Utah's Ecological and Epidemiological Department was called in to investigate. Quickly, reports of the incident were coming out in both local and national newspapers. The epidemic was seen in flocks across the Skull Valley. Over the following days, more and more sheep would be discovered dead. Around 1 week after the first discovery, an estimated nearly 2,000 had died. The symptoms were found to be with some kind of damage to the animal's nervous system. Initially, it was thought that fertilizer of some sort had been ingested by the sheep, but testing found no traces. The sheep's injuries hinted at a nerve agent. Funny that, especially in a strange coincidence, but not too far away there was a chemical testing site. The evidence was pointing that maybe Dugway a few miles away might have had something to do with the random deaths of thousands of sheep. Around 8 days after the discovery of the dead sheep, Senator for Utah Frank E. Moss revealed that there had been nerve agent testing in the days leading up to the incident. The report he had received was released by the Senator's office. It isn't 100% known if it was marked as official use or not. The Senator's team claimed it wasn't and the Army claimed it was. Regardless, the Army had to admit that on the 13th of March 1968, 3 VX weapons tests had been undertaken at Dugway. It would turn out that the 3 weapons tests were of a VX loaded shell, an open pit burn of VX, and a release from an F4 Phantom. The first 2 being localised tests. It seemed less likely to be the culprit. However, the F4 Phantom air test would turn out to be the biggest suspect. It happened some 27 miles to the southwest of the closest dead sheep. The Army kept on denying any link. However, it would be leaked that there was a small issue with the aerial release test. The test release required the aircraft to dispense VX over a target area at an altitude of roughly 150 feet, after which the plane would climb and jettison its empty tanks. However, a fault in the nozzle of the MU-28B ARAM air spray tank meant that it continued to dispense VX after the F-4 Phantom had completed its run and entered its climb before its jettison. This released VX at a much higher altitude than planned, allowing it to be carried by the wind beyond the drop zone, which on the day of the test was blowing from the southwest at speeds of 35 miles an hour, right into the direction of the nearest affected sheep. Later on the 13th, rain showers hit the Skull Valley. This would have helped in washing the VX into the ground. The evidence was mounting up, although the army would continue to refuse to admit it was the cause of the release. Testing of soil in the Skull Valley found traces of VX. Strangely, there were other animals intermingled amongst the sheep, but none showed symptoms of exposure. I'll come back to this in a little bit. After the initial incident, sheep would show signs of exposure until June 1968. By the end of the event, nearly 7,000 sheep had died or had been put down due to injury. Aftermath. Although the evidence was pretty well stacked up that VX was the killer and that it had come from Dugway, the US Army bitterly held on to the assertion that it was not responsible. Dugway had no off-site monitoring, meaning it was impossible for them to tell if there was an off-site release. Likely, if there were no sheep in the area, the release might have gone unnoticed. Human effects were minimal, with some farmers experiencing mild nausea and other VX-related symptoms, as well as a few veterinarians who had done the autopsies on the affected animals. But how was it that the sheep were more affected? Well, at the time VX hadn't really been tested on sheep, thus its effects were unknown beyond the usual effects on mammals. The event actually ended up showing sheep are much more sensitive to lower concentrations than, say, horses, dogs or humans. Testing on other animals found decreased cholesterase in blood tests, which is an indication of nerve gas exposure. Also, as stated in Nerve Gas Dugway Accident Linked to Utah Sheep Kill by Philip M. Boffey, the first sheep that died may have been killed by the nerve agent, but those that died later succumbed to such secondary causes, such as starvation. In a report published by the National Communicable Disease Center in Atlanta, more evidence was found pointing towards the Army during their water and foliage testing, stating, "The tests prove beyond a doubt that the responses are in fact identical and can be attributed to the same chemical." Eventually, the US Army would kind of confess, even paying out compensation to farmers in the area. In total, $376,000 for 6,249 sheep were claimed for, about twice the market value. This was pushed for by Congress and Utah's governor, although throughout the Army would still claim that they were not responsible. The event went deeper with the people of Utah than a mini sheep genocide, as it solidified anti-US Army and wider federal government sentiments in the aftermath, as no one really took responsibility, and even after evidence proved otherwise for disaster, claimed it still wasn't them, as stated in the Salt Lake Tribune in 1998. The Dugway Sheep Incident is loaded with symbolic value in Utah. It is brought up regularly at public hearings as one of the two reasons Utahns distrust the Army and, to a lesser degree, all other federal agencies. The other frequently cited cause of distrust is federal lies about the safety of open-air nuclear weapons testing at the Nevada test site in the 1950s and 1960s that sent clouds of radioactive fallout drifting into Utah. The event created a political wave that would in 1969 result in the discontinuation of open-air chemical weapons testing, eventually resulting in the reaffirmed no first-use policy on chemical weapons by Richard Nixon, as well as renouncing the use of biological weapons. The period put chemical weapons under scrutiny, with the sheep kill, Agent Orange controversy, and the 1969 Okinawa incident all being in the news around the same time. But we do have to talk about alternative theories. There is some evidence that maybe VX wasn't the culprit. Pre-EPA days in the US was a bit of a wild west for people finding chemical solutions to problems. This included illegal fertilizers and pesticides. A theory at the time was that farmers had hired 2 crop dusters with a plan to spray pesticides for killing weevils, which can also be an organophosphate, over where alfalfa was grown. This is a crop that is used for grazing animals to eat. The theory goes that farmers were spraying too close to the sheep, which in turn killed them, and wanting to recoup the cost of the animals, moved the carcasses to land close to Dugway to try and blame the army. This is not such a believable theory, personally. However, the other theory is a bit more interesting, is that of espionage. If you look at the result of the event, which was a reduced chemical and biological weapons program, you can look at who benefited from it. Cui bono is always a good question to ask. But who else but the Soviets, as noted in A Mighty Wind, Nerve Gas, 6,000 Dead Sheep, and Soviet Trickery by Dr. Stephen J. The party that benefited the most was, of course, the Soviet Union, which obtained a monopoly on significant development on biological weapons. You see, cutting down the US weapons program would always be a good thing, at least in the USSR's eyes. And interestingly, the reason why it was pushed for by the government to blame the US Army was maybe they didn't want to admit that Soviet agents were releasing nerve agents on US soil. Ultimately, we will never know the cause, but it is very interesting to ponder. Dugway Proving Ground is still in operation today, and it is still not without its controversial events. So it's scale time. It's going to be a 1, but on the sheep scale, it's got to be a 9 or a 10. And this is what I've got for my disaster root cause analysis card. Do you agree? Let me know in the comments below. This is a Plain Difficult production. All videos on the channel are Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike licensed. Plain Difficult videos are produced by me, John, in a currently pretty cold and miserable corner of southern London, UK. And all I have to say is thank you very much for watching, and Mr. Music, can you play us out please?